Hi, I'm Rachel, here with my cat Leia, and I'm checking in for my weekend update in reading. And yes, this counts as a weekend update because in the States it's a 3-day weekend for Labor Day, so I took that loophole. I can't believe my special long weekend, and actually I also took Friday off of work. It's almost over now and it makes me so sad, and although I did accomplish a fair bit through this weekend, I believe, you might have seen my 2017 National Book Fest vlog, where I spent most of the day Saturday at the Library of Congress's National Soiree, and it was a lot of fun. I also completed my August 2017 literary newsletter. I do a literary newsletter on my blog every month where I put in snippets of all of the books that I read, and I include a special book pick because I work with books, so I see some interesting ones sometimes. And I had a meme and I had a TBR list, and it's sort of my pride and joy still from my pre-booktube days that I still carry forward. And I also feature my booktube channel a little, and so I'll link to that down below. It was a great newsletter because I think I've had maybe the best reading month of my life, to be honest. I finished 10 books, and yeah, that is a whole lot for me. And I'm hoping to match that because there's just so much good stuff to read, and I'm not sure if I can this month because I actually did listen to a fair amount of audiobooks last month, and I listen to audiobooks at a time when I really can't read physical books, so I get extra reading time in, but I don't actually have any audiobooks, I believe, that will be available to me this month, and I have a lot of print books. So I don't know if I can actually do it, but I'm going to try, and we'll see how this goes. But anyway, in regards to September reading, so far so good. I finished 2 books, and here's the first one. You've seen this on my channel a lot if you've watched my other update videos. It is Return of the Native. It is my first buddy read ever that I did with Curtis from Curtis Books and Films. He's now moved on to ShakeTube and seems to be much more involved in the buddy reading process, but I knew him when we were both novice buddy readers with Thomas Hardy, and we have now since finished the book, and it's been an interesting ride because we've been reading it in increments throughout the last several weeks, and when I finished the book, it was my first time to think about it as an entire piece and to try to notice things that might have gone over my head a little in the interim when I was focusing on the small stuff. So I think I'll stick with my analysis from before about how, in cliche terms, a leopard can't change its stripes, and how these 4 protagonists get involved in marriages that they shouldn't have because they should have known better about what they wanted versus what their partners wanted. But you get into these things and lo and behold, you know, people don't change that much. And you aren't so happy when you should have known better. And on top of that, you know, there's this thing that I think is in some other Victorian literature, this sort of moralizing thing where Hardy can have a heavy hand in his narration sometimes. Like, you know, there was a gambling scene a few weeks ago where one person would win everything in a row. You know, it's like Hardy's saying very specifically, this is how the money will go. This is where it will go to. This is what it means. And it's not like any back and forth. It's this one person always wins it. And with the ending, we kind of get that too, with this big moment of, well, spoilers, I don't know, spoilers for a Victorian novel written before any of us were born. But yeah, it's a very heavy-handed event about how things end and what it all means. Although, interestingly enough, he added this small 6th book on top of this 5-book tragedy where certain characters get a happier ending than apparently maybe he meant to do in the beginning when he started this serialized novel, but certain characters do get this happier ending, and I think it's based a little maybe on what his readers wanted. I don't know. It's an interesting concept for today's day and age, I think, where when readers demand too much these days, it's like, you know, hold your horses, this isn't your art. And a final note, because I'm rambling on enough, but I guess I really came to appreciate and think more broadly about how the rustic scenery of the heath was really its own character. and how much it really meant to all of the characters, how much Eustacia hated it, and how much Clem and Thomasin really loved it, especially Clem. And I started to think more about how, you know, they were unearthing old ruins, and Clem was working as a laborer, and it just really felt like a living, thriving place, and it added an extra dimension to what the characters were going through. So I really liked that. I'm glad I read this book, and thank you so much, Curtis, for recommending it. Okay, next we have something that's sort of a buddy read, because it's for Anna and Eric's book club. I finished An Unrestored Woman by Shobha. And I was going to do a review of it on its own, but I don't think I will, because this was for their August monthly reading, and I believe they've already even filmed their video for this and the other book they did for August. So instead I thought I might do a 2-for-1 review, and I have one of their September books on hold at the library right now, just waiting for it to come in. So I thought I'd review that one and this one together, hopefully before September's at an end, so that I can be a part of that conversation in some way anyway. And I'm really looking forward to hearing their thoughts on this collection. I was very moved. I don't know how to explain it. Can you say moved about something so horribly violent? Am I speaking about my cynical nature again? This book is largely takes place around the partition of India and Pakistan, but other stories take place in the past and the future, and I kind of feel like it's a little too simplistic to say this is about the partition. I mean, those politics play a lot into most of these stories, and of course the stories in the past deal with British colonialism, stories in the present deal with the aftermath of everything, or near the present. But I feel like the theme has more to do with the title. This is about the lives of women, and often how they're touched by violence or by other forces. And I really appreciated her paired short stories format. I guess as a short story writer, it forced me to look at the form of the short story more closely than sometimes I do or should. And I looked at all of the parallels between each paired stories, where characters would reappear from one to the other, and also I think themes were very similar. In my Goodreads review, I ramble about each and every story, but here I might ramble about my 2 favorites, which were Blindfold and The Lost Ribbon. These are, I think, undoubtedly the most severely violent stories, so trigger warnings. There's a lot of sexual abuse. But it's not the sensationalism that got me in these stories. It was what she did with how she told the story. In Blindfold, I can almost not believe it, but it was a horror story, and I liked it. I mean, I don't usually like horror. I'm a literary person. I mean, I guess that's what I'll have to say. This was literary horror. I think deep thoughts. But, I mean, the protagonist is this hugely unlikable brothel madam who abducts this young girl to sell into prostitution, and we are in her head as she justifies all of this and what she wants for herself, and she's so believable and so hateable. But the focus is on this girl's revenge, and it's just told in these increments of something is wrong here, and is this girl being beaten down yet, or do I have to beat her down more, or how can I get the most out of this? But, you know, there's just little details throughout the story of the few years that it takes part in about this woman getting hoodwinked, or is she, and she questions, and as the character plots her slow revenge. And I just found it really fascinating in that regard. And then this former brothel owner appears in the next story, which takes place around the partition. I should say that the story I just talked about was in the late 1800s. And this next one takes place during the violence, when there's so much mass immigration between Hindus in the Pakistan area moving to India, and vice versa with the Muslims moving to Pakistan. And in this story, the crux of the action is about this Hindu woman who's abducted by a Muslim man and is taken to a hut, and things happen to her there, but it's told in first person, which I ultimately came to realize is so important, because I feel like this woman couldn't have a name. I felt like that was important to the things that happened to her, where she was abducted. And then also she got pregnant, but then when the Indian authorities came for her and she had this baby by a Muslim father, they wouldn't take the Muslim baby back to India with them. And just, I guess, the multifacetedness of how wrong this woman was. And we hear about it in flashbacks, but also in the present day when this woman is living in an Indian community center. And so we get to see the full scope of what was taken from her. And all the other stories, I think, for the most part, were really strong, very powerful too, and just fully realized with characters and world building and writing. I just thought this was great. I'm just so grateful that Eric and Anna gave me impetus to read this. Next, I'm going to start this book very soon. It's Hidden Figures by Margot Shetterly. She was actually at the book fest on Saturday, but I didn't get to see her. I could have probably slipped in for the last part of her panel, but I didn't, and that was silly of me. But oh well, I guess that's not as important as finally having this book, because I've been on hold at the library for 8 months. So even though I'm actually a bit intimidated, because this is nonfiction, and I don't read a lot of it, and it's very dry, and it's about math, which is a foreign language to me, so I'm very intimidated. And yet I've been on the holds list for so long that I feel compelled, like I really just need to read this. I at least need to try it. So this book, which was made into a movie last year, is about the African-American women who, during mid-century, worked as mathematicians for the space program. This very unknown and surprising part of our history. And for nonfiction, I know that it's not very long. I think it's under, like, not taking in the notes and the acknowledgments and all that, I think it's under 430 pages. And I also think this is the large text edition, because that one didn't have as many holds at the library. So what do you know? So I know that hopefully I'll get through this in a relatively decent amount of time. Because as I said, I have so many other books that I'm hoping to get through soon. And one of them is my newest personal project, of Jewish alternate history books. I have 3 that were recently published. Not the Shobha one then, but I call that the granddaddy book. But 3 others by Jewish women that were published, I think, all last year. And so I added them to my list and thought I'd make a video about all of them at the end of this month. And the first one on the list is The Book of Esther by Emily Barton. This book I think is going to be kind of bananas. Emily Barton takes this small sliver of history where several centuries back, for a very small period of time, there were some Turkic rulers in this area called Khazaria who converted to Judaism, which is really shocking on its own, because Judaism doesn't have a lot of converts like that, certainly not rulers of other nations. So it was enough to make an impact and raise a few eyebrows. But then this Khazaria was quickly overthrown and submerged into the recesses of history. But Barton takes away that aspect and imagines a Khazaria that exists into the 20th century and encompasses the event that all modern Jewish alternative histories want to address, which is, of course, the Holocaust. So Khazaria is this nation in the 40s, which is seeing a lot of refugees from Germania because of the Holocaust, and Esther, the main character, sees this as an affront and a big problem for the survival of all the Jewish people. And so then she goes to some Kabbalists to change her into a man so that people will follow her into battle. And then there are golems and other parts of Jewish mysticism and lore, and there's also some sort of steampunk aspects with the horses, and it's just crazy pants. All the reviews that I read say this is just a bit too ridiculous to suspend all disbelief. But I think it's just supposed to be so fun and so multifaceted that hopefully it'll still be a good roaring story. This one is also really long. It's about 415 pages with smaller text, which for fiction is probably on a little bit of the longer side. So we'll see how we get. I hope it's a fascinating, quick-paced read. So that about covers it for me. I'd love to hear about what books and reading projects you're hoping to get into this September. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.